Hello, my name is Nicholas Giannessi.
And I'm Fletcher Nugent, and welcome back to the thesatyapodcast. Today, Nick and I are just going to have a chat because we think from the feedback that we got, most people like hearing us just chatting. So that's also, we couldn't get a guest on as well, if we're being totally honest. So yeah, we thought that we would speak about some texts that have inspired us. And one is the Tao Te Ching. So there are many different translations of the Tao Te Ching, and I'll probably get Nick to give you all a bit more of an intro into the book, where it came from, what it actually is. But essentially what we're going to do today is just open a couple of chapters, read them, speak about what they mean to us. This has been a really, really amazing book for myself. It's a very grounding book, very grounding text, and it brings me back often when I'm away in thought. And as I said, it's very grounding. So I bought this book at a store in LA. It was like a gypsy store, and it was like this little pocket edition, and I've never been able to find one like it since. So yeah, it's an amazing book for me and for Nick. And as I said, this is the Stephen Mitchell translation, and Nick will explain a bit more about that.
Before I do, I was just going to ask you why you like it. And obviously you say it's grounding, but a little bit more on that'll be nice.
Yeah. So I love the Tao Te Ching because of its simplicity. So reading any of these spiritual texts or spiritual books, as I said, they're very grounding. So what does that mean? That means that it brings you back into the essence of yourself. And it really allows me to penetrate some things in my mind, trying to work out the deeper questions, like what this is, what's going on, how it's happening. And certain books speak to you intellectually, but they also speak to your heart. And I think this speaks to my heart in many ways as well, because it is such an ancient text. How old is it? 2,500 years old. And the wisdom hasn't changed. It's just how we interpret that wisdom. So I don't know, why does it speak to you?
It's probably the one text I've read the most. I've lived with the Tao Te Ching for probably about 9 years. I've literally read I'm talking probably up till about 3 years ago. I've read every English translation, and I know there's new translations popping up every year. I did have I think I've got it saved somewhere. There was a blog post that had the PDF of every English translation, and I remember my Buddhist teacher said to me, what do you find different about the English texts? And my answer to that was, just off reading a couple of chapters, a lot of the translations I found were speaking from intellect alone. And she said to me, you got it. Because from my understanding, because she's Chinese as well, I think the English translations are pretty far away from the Chinese translations. But I work off 3 translations. This one, which I think is a great entry-level one, because it's very available, from Stephen Mitchell. Stephen Mitchell's an academic, but he also spent 14 years in a Zen monastery, so he has some type of experience. Oh, the wind there. He has some type of experience with meditation. Would you want to close that window?
No, don't worry about it.
That'll be all right.
Yeah.
A bit wobbly there. So Stephen Mitchell's had some experience, and he says he's seen it. He says, I've actually seen masters who have melded with Tao. We can go into a little bit about what Tao means, essentially, which will be interesting, because it's a hard word to translate even in Chinese. But anyway, another translation I love is from Jia Fu Feng and Jane English, which is known as a classic. Jia Fu Feng was a Taoist practitioner, translating into English. So that's a lovely translation. In my opinion, it's very different from that one. And there's chapters of this book I still don't understand. And I said this to my Buddhist teacher once. I said, there's so many chapters I don't understand. He said, that's good. Because if you did understand them, you'd be enlightened. And the text opens up to you, the reader. Every spiritual text should do that. But as you grow with your spiritual understanding and practice, the text will open up more and more to you. There is another one, and unfortunately, it's a new one that I've been reading, and I can't remember who the author is, so I might put it in the editing or share it in another video. But there is another translation that I've been enjoying as well. And the reason I like these is, as I said, because there's the people who write them have a spiritual practice as well. So it's not just coming from the intellect, it's coming from a spiritual practice as well. So it's worked for me because, same as what Fletcher said, because it's simple. It's very simple. And I think everybody understands truth, not intellectually, but when you hear truth, or when somebody shares truth who's living truth, or you read a text like this that's timeless, it resonates.
For sure. And you bring up a really good point between truth and lies. And for me, that's how I see the spiritual journey. It's a journey of truth and discovering truth.
Satya.
And how do you know what truth is? Because as you said, truth resonates, and it resonates from within. So you can think about a really simple example, like I think of just one example today, and this isn't a judgment. I was just observing two guys probably about my age in the gym, and they were just talking about tattoos and like girls, and it was all really fake. And I always try and notice the feelings within me that make me feel uncomfortable. And obviously that's the practice of meditation that we were sitting with. But I was like, it's really funny how them just talking and, energetically transactioning, which is what speaking is, made me feel uncomfortable. And I was like, why does it make me feel uncomfortable? And I was like, because they're not being truthful. They're just kind of playing this superficial game, which I totally get. And again, it's not a judgment. It's people trying to relate to each other. But what's that feeling inside? What's the indication inside you? It's that feel of unease, that feel of discomfort. It's a total opposite when you read something like this. So you go deep within and you hear a spiritual teaching. It's a truth that's almost being extracted from within you, and it resonates. It makes you feel more whole. It makes you feel more unified.
More naked
as well, for sure.
Because what those two guys, and we've all done it, or still do it, what they're doing is, the power of now is another text that did that for me. When I am the power of now gave me, we said we're going to mention about satoris. I had a satori from reading.
What is a satori?
Satori is on the spiritual journey. It's a flash of enlightenment. In my experience anyway, if there's ever been a time when my practice has plateaued, or I go through challenges, or anything that has maybe made me feel disheartened, the moments of satori can be a breakthrough where you experience whatever it is. I think I'm looking for the essence of life, pure presence. What I would imagine enlightenment to be like. You know what I mean? So,
well, I'd stop you there and say it's not imagining enlightenment, is it? It's an experiential thing. Yeah, again, and it's hard to articulate. So you can only really articulate from your best understanding, the best words that you can use.
Absolutely. So, but what they've always done for me is they've always made me keep moving in the right direction.
It's a little taste. It's a little piece of fruit along the way. Well, I know that a lot of people would want to hear about a satori.
So one of the satoris, I mean, I've had a number of satoris, but just following on from what I was saying with the power of now. And this wasn't a judgment at all, but what I got from the power of now, the text, which is a great text, is how the masks we wear, which is personality, comes from persona. Persona, I think, is from the Greek play, where the per means mask, and where they just have a mask, and you only hear the voice. So sona is sound. So we wear multiple masks, being a father, husband, friend. So, but we hide behind the mask. That's where persona and personality come from. And
just to stop you there as well, these masks are fundamentally illusions. They're not real. Mm-hmm. So again, it's a really simple way to understand it is the spiritual path, again, is aligning with this truth, and that can often be quite brutal. And you said before, it's becoming naked. So we wear these masks, and these masks aren't necessarily a negative thing, but I think where we get caught in the cycle of attachment is identifying with these masks, because they're not the truth. And then eventually down the line, these masks are torn apart, whether we tear them apart, the environment, or someone else tears them apart. And then again, we feel worried, we feel naked, we feel concerned.
Well, suffering is clinging to the mask.
That's it. Suffering is clinging to a lie, clinging to an illusion.
Mm-hmm.
So continue on, Tori.
So, in The Power of Now, he explains beautifully how the thinking mind is always trying to create drama or problems in time. Okay, mind and time need each other to exist. They always reliving a past trauma or projecting a future drama or problem into the future. And the true essence is the conscious observer behind that. That's what meditation, in my opinion, fundamentally is. It's creating a gap where you can separate who you fundamentally are from the thinker and observe your thoughts. It's not necessarily about stopping your thoughts. It's about being the conscious observer that's observing the thoughts. And the Satori I got was, I remember being in Sydney in the city, and I was just walking around, not judging, but just observing everybody. And whether it was someone ordering a coffee, someone walking to work, anyone who was interacting, everybody was communicating from the mask to the mask, the mind to the mind. There was no one who, including myself, I lived like 99% of my day in that space. But just being able to be still for a minute, it was like nobody cares what anyone's talking about. Nobody, it's all superficial, fake. There's no depth. This is why you can almost predict that a group of lads in a pub are talking about, you can basically guess what they're talking about. And they don't care. They don't, they might think they care about football, steak and beers and women, but they truly don't. You know what I'm saying? It's just all a superficial, my persona, my mask is interacting with another mask. And just, it's hard to put into words, but just to see it like that was just a massive aha moment. Again, it wasn't a judgment. It was just a clear observation.
How did it make you feel?
Both happy and sad, because one, it was an insight, but two, it was a reality check.
So what makes that profound insight, Satori, different from an insight that you may have just walking down the street?
Well, for me, it's an experience. Sometimes an insight can connect dots. You know what I mean? Like, if something might come up and I might think, oh my gosh, that's just explained something I heard 2 years ago so clearly. And to some degree, that's like a Satori, because it's not just like an aha moment. The whole body feels it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But a Satori's for me is different. It's more of because with like an insight, there might be a bit of excitement there. Mm-hmm. There's no excitement, in my opinion, with a Satori. Mm-hmm. It's just stillness. You know what I mean? It's just a state of observation with no attachments, no judgments, no good, right, wrong, good or bad. And that's a very different experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very profound. And then, as you said, it's, like these little pieces of fruit along the journey that keep you going and that spur you on to keep practicing. Because one of the questions I've been asked by one of my friends is like, why are you doing this stuff? Like, why don't you just sit back and enjoy life? And you have to do both. You can't separate the two. But enlightenment, if that's what we're after, has to be greater than the joys and the pleasures that we experience here.
Well, it's sort of the question. I'd have asked him a question, when he says like, why don't you sit back and enjoy life? I'd just say, what is enjoying life to you?
Yeah.
Because those insights only enrich your life experience.
Absolutely, for sure. I'm sure we did have some sort of conversation like that, but it was just that question that I remember, because it did make me think as well, which is good. It's really good. And I watched something really interesting last night. I was watching some stories about these Rinpoches. So that's a spiritual teacher in Tibetan Buddhism. and they go
through. Rinpoche is a reincarnated.
Yes, correct. So, and these reincarnated spiritual teachers, these Rinpoches, were being found in places like the US and Spain, one of them as well, which is traditionally quite different because in Tibetan Buddhism, from what I understand, generally they're born around Asian areas. So they're born in places like India and China, mainly Tibet. So these beings, these humans, these Rinpoches can consciously be reborn. And then the Rinpoches of the time, so the elders of the time, will be able to recognize them through.
Well, they tell them.
They tell them?
Yeah, generally, like say I'm a Rinpoche and I'm dying, and they also choose when they die. They can die consciously. But I might actually tell you where I'm going to reincarnate. So they already know that there's I might say my next experience, I want to be in America, for example.
I forgot where I was going with that, but it's extremely fascinating.
No,
it's
you saying that in Spain?
Yeah, so there was a Spanish kid who's now actually a teacher. I'll put the link in there as well. I listened to one of his discourses this morning, and it was really.
Did he
really
go down the Tibetan path?
He did.
Because I've seen a documentary where a lot of them reject the path.
Yeah, so he did, but he's no longer a monk. So he was a monk from 14 months old, so a little baby, until he was 18, and now he's left. But it's very interesting when you sit there and you listen to someone like that speak, because there's a level and a depth to the transmission of wisdom, and you can tell that when they're speaking, by just listening and being quiet, that their wisdom that they're sharing is not just coming from this lifetime. It's not just an intellectual wisdom. And again, you begin to understand that by sitting there and being present and just listening in silence. So, but I will go back one step as well, because...
Well, I was just going to add something.
Sure,
to
go
that,
for it.
If you remember what you're going to say. Whenever I've heard that a spiritual teacher shares something, they can share something so simple that can give you such a profound moment of satori, right? And if you try and relay it, share it to someone, it's well, in my experience, it's lost its essence. And you don't, it doesn't come out the same. Now, an insight that I got from that, because if you research like the oral transmission is a famous, this is how a lot of teachers passed on wisdom to their disciples. They would just give an oral transmission, they give a teaching, and they would get it. My understanding of that is, if you look at everything as frequency and vibration, and everything as a message and information, if I was to share wisdom that I'd heard, but I maybe understood 20% and wasn't living, then when it came through me and I shared it with you, you might gain it. You might gain insight from it, but the chances are you're only getting a small percentage of the teaching. Whereas if a genuine master understands it to it like fully and lives it and is experiencing it on a daily, when they share it, it's an oral transmission, because it might just be one sentence, but it's got the vibration and the information of the full teaching in it, and that's what knocks you over almost. You know. Absolutely,
you fit the nail on the head, and that's the difference between reading and hearing it from old mate down the street. It makes it more than just a theory. And Dr. Bennett, your Buddhist teacher, I had the pleasure of speaking with, actually said something very similar, and she said, I never teach or try and explain something that I haven't experienced, which I think is really important, because you can't talk about something that you haven't experienced, because it's not truthful. You can theorize about it and you can be open about theorizing about it. But that did remind me of what I was going to say. And I don't know why I was going to say this, but it's very interesting in these Tibetan monasteries that they'll read something from that, for example, Buddha supposedly said, and then they'll have an active debate. So one will take a position of, no, that's not the truth. And the other one will take the position of, yes, that's the truth. Why that's so important is because the truth always prevails. So it's so dangerous to attach and live in these masks, when you were using the example of people in the street. But what's so saddening and so frightening is, once you do step out of that, is you see that people have no idea that they're actually living in falsehood, that they're living in lies. The issue with that is inevitably it's going to cause you suffering. But what's so extremely terrifying about that is if you can't recognize the source of your suffering, you're just stuck in this constant wheel, which is samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. So I had an insight today driving, and I was thinking about the 10 Taos, which I actually don't know what they are. They all are, but essentially they're virtues. So for example, there's forgiveness, love, humility, and another 7. But how I see those virtues is they're like steering posts, guiding posts for truth. So if you're living in humility, your actions are humble. You're aligning yourself with truth. You're pulling yourself out of suffering, out of lies. So they're just some unifying principles, which I think are really important. And that kind of brings us back to this book. So
I will just say something on the 10 Taos, the 10 conditions of Tao. This is what my teacher said, my Tao teacher, he said, if you live one of them, you live in all of them.
Yeah, correct.
But at the same time, and they all stem from love, he says, but.
Which is what? Because we had this conversation before as well, and I think that love is so misunderstood. For me, I said to you, my best articulation of love is connection, like genuine connection. But you went even further than that. You might not remember the conversation. We were driving to old mate's place. We got the car.
I don't remember what I said. But.
Yeah. What was more profound than connection?
No, but I remember listening to Dan Payne. Dan Payne was saying that love doesn't work. And I sent the interview to my friend Kate back in England, and she said she really enjoyed the interview. But I didn't agree with him saying love doesn't work. And I said, I do agree with him. And she was shocked by that. And she obviously said, what do you mean by that? And my point is, I think what Dan Payne is saying, love doesn't work. I think he's right, because we as humans don't understand what love is. A human's love is very much conditional. You love people who are nice to you or who are doing good in the world, and you don't love people who are not nice to you. So that love will never work.
Correct.
So I think he's right in saying that the more we can harmonize with true love, which is the love that nature gives, which is, the sun doesn't choose who it shines on. No matter what we do to the earth, she provides for us. It's unconditional. There's no conditions on that love. That to me is true love. And let's say there's true love. Human love's far away. So that's what the journey is to love. It's moving away from the selfishness to selflessness.
Why is it unconditional? Why is the truth of love unconditional?
Well, because if we look at the Buddha said all phenomena is selfless. And my teacher says everything in the universe is an unconditional universal servant. Same thing.
Like you gave the example of the tree.
The tree, but if you look at the chair, okay, this chair serves as a chair selflessly. The mics serve as a mic selflessly. So all phenomena serves selflessly. Now, when we move into selfishness, we are separating ourselves from the whole and our true nature. Therefore, that's where the ego comes in.
Which is a fundamental lie. Right? Because our essence is one. We are all one. But obviously, it's a paradox, clearly, because you can look on this screen, you see Fletcher and you see Nick. There's two beings there. There's two beings there. And fundamentally, I see it as the journey of returning home, coming back, understanding, taking on these teachings and unifying with the whole, which is one. So that's why I think that these virtues being pinned on connection are the guiding posts for us to unify, purify, and come back to one, to whole.
In the Zen tradition, they say not one, not two, but both. And I love that. And what they mean by that is, for using heart and mind, for example, people say the heart and mind are one because they're in communication with each other all the time. That's true. But they're also two. So they're not one, they're not two, they're both. And that's true wholeness. Okay? So when you look at fractals as well, this is where I think, thank you, quantum physics and science is having a breakthrough, is when we look at fractals in nature, if you look at let's say a broccoli is many smaller branches of a broccoli, but each one of them is unique. Each one of them is in a different location. Okay, it's got its own unique signature, but it's a part of the whole broccoli. You with me? So I remember Osho used to say as well, he said, separation is death, and wholeness, oneness is life. Unity is life. And he says, if you take the petal from the flower, the petal dies. If you separate the flower from the flower dies. The tree from the earth, the tree dies. And this works on a micro and a macro. So you look at a cancer cell, you listen to like Zach Bush, and he says basically a cancer cell is cut off from its all communication from the rest of the body, and it becomes separate and becomes a cancer cell. Well, that same principle on a human level is the more you identify with your separate self, your ego identity. Nicholas Giannassi, who's got this podcast as a window cleaner, blah blah blah. The more I identify with that, the more I'm cutting myself off from the whole. And you find people who are more identified with their labels, which is an important point that we spoke about today. Actually, our identity, identification is causing so much suffering now. Because you are so identified as a separate being, separate entity, that you become anti-life, just as the cancer cell does. Now you look at that on a collective scale, it works the same way. The more humans have cut themselves off from nature, try to conquer nature, we're destroying the world.
It's a tricky one though, and I think this is where the Buddhist teaching of the middle path or the middle way is so valuable, because
emptiness.
And emptiness as well. But just on the middle way is that you think about from what you've just said, and someone might walk away and go, oh, the ego is bad, I'm going to get rid of my ego. But in terms of getting rid of the ego and making the ego an enemy, you're of course creating another ego. So it's this.
That's the ego doing it, yeah.
That's the ego doing it. So you're getting caught in this cycle. So it's definitely not about denying what you are and what makes you you. And we all have our unique paths back to this one truth. And it's about finding that and acknowledging it. But, even I think about the response to what's going on in the world at the moment with COVID, and we can talk about that forever, which we won't today. But just this whole idea of separating people, separating ourselves from nature and from life, it does have to make you think in terms of, how do you think you survive in the world? Do you think that you're not relying on clean air, clean water, clean food? Do you think you're not reliant on the support and the communication and the energetic transactions with one another? How do you feel when you lock yourself away all day, maybe on your computer? You don't feel great, opposed to how do you feel when you're in a social scenario just around people, you feel re-energized? Now might be slightly different for people, but again, when you look at the micro and the macro, it's like the hermetic principle. So as within, so without, as above, so below. And that comes back to this whole idea of interconnectedness, that everything is connected and relying upon each other to exist. And it's only us as the observer labeling things that makes things seem separate from one another. But really, when you step back for a second and you may have a satori, you realize the unification, the oneness of all things, and the reliant nature of all things, and it all being one. I remember I've had two profound satoris, and one was more of an intellectually instigated satori. I remember I was journaling by a river in Brisbane, and I was just asking the question, who am I? And I was listing all these things that made up who I was. And then I realized, but that can't be it, because that no longer exists. And I'm no longer that person. And that's how someone else sees me. That's how I think someone else sees me. And that kept getting more and more and more and more and more refined until I hit this moment where I was like, I'm just the essence of life. I'm just life. That's the best way I can describe it. But again, with the satori, momentary enlightenment, it was this enlightening feeling. And I remember I had another one which was a little bit different and more profound for me, because I wasn't instigating any intellectual thought. I was simply walking in a shopping mall, and out of nowhere, my body just lit up like a Christmas tree, and I felt so light. I felt one with everything, but yet I could observe it separately. And I remember looking across the mall there was a guy walking with his girlfriend, who's probably a little bit younger than me. And I knew and could feel and understand everything he was thinking. And I knew, that might sound a little bit crazy, but I could feel everything about him, all he was doing. There was no judgment there at all. I just knew it. I could sense it. I could feel her. And yeah, it was incredible. It lasted probably 15 seconds, and then it just slowly passed. And I remember going home and journaling about it, and some other things happened after that as well in relating to that event. Mm-hmm. But as you said, it spurs you on. It gives you more motivation that you are on this path, because I know in the world today, especially with things you can't describe, like there's no way that I can articulate those experiences well enough for someone to understand and then be like, oh, you're telling the truth. You know, so easily you can sit there and say you're making it up. But as I said, the truth is the truth.
I will add one thing to that, because there's one thing observing your journeys since I've known you. The one thing I think you've had such incredible experiences, why you've had them, is because of the practice.
Yeah, for sure.
It's the importance of a practice. And I remember watching a documentary series on Gaia called Psychedelica, and it was showing all different psychedelics and the history, who used them and what for. It was great. But there was about 4 times, I heard the same thing where people were saying psychedelics in one sitting can give you what 30 years of meditation can give you. And I couldn't help but think to myself, that's coming from somebody who hasn't had a practice for that long. So the good thing with meditation is, in my opinion, is it's forever. It's not something you're only going to do for a period of time. I've been meditating for 10 years. I'm seriously not even scratching the surface. You know what I mean? You've had some incredible experiences lately, which obviously give you a bit more of what is possible.
Absolutely.
But, I've had psychedelics as well. And as much as they were great, and I recommend them, I've had experiences deeper than that through meditation. So I can't emphasize enough for people to get a daily practice and stick to it.
So why do you think that's so important? Because on one level I can understand, and I haven't gone deep into psychedelics. I've had psychedelic experiences, but not as deep as many people that I've spoken with. So perhaps it's not something I could speak about so much in depth. But I remember speaking with Sean last week's episode about this whole idea of walking before you can run. Mm-hmm. And what I'm really understanding now and beginning to experience now, having some more experiences, is the benefits of cultivating discipline and cultivating mindfulness. So I'm able to experience these experiences, not attached to them, do my best not attach to them, whilst experiencing them fully, and then remaining grounded and carrying on. So I can actually see the nature of these events and the nature of our potential without getting caught up in it. And I feel like if you were to dive straight into the deep end, maybe that's your path. That's not for me to say. That's not for you to say. Mm-hmm. But I know that for me personally, if I was to jump straight into the deep end, I think for me, it would probably be a little bit too much.
Well, you can always do things responsibly. And what I mean by that is, let's say the deep end in meditation is going and trying to meditate and do the same practice as a Tibetan Rinpoche who's on his, 10th lifetime, reincarnating into the same practice. It's like getting in the ring with,
Big Mike Tyson.
Big Mike Tyson in his prime. You know what I'm saying? You're a fish out of water. You know what I'm saying? So that's why it's important to start at the bottom of meditation. Same thing. If I go and take psychedelics and I go and take 15 grams of psilocybin, it's going to be a horrible experience. You with me? I took 3 grams. It was more than enough. In fact, when I finished that, I felt like, next time I'd like to have half of that. But the reason I'm not saying go out and take psychedelics, but the reason I would say, yeah, I see why you would have them, is because sometimes if you've been conditioned so much to see the world a certain way your whole life, psychedelics can just break that down. And what's left is questioning the nature of reality. You know what I'm saying? So I think they can serve a purpose in that way.
So it's the catalyst for, the deeper question of who am I, which you may not have. And I totally get why some people may not be aware of that question within, given their life circumstances, good or bad. So yeah, I think that's a really good point for sure. But yeah, as always do them responsibly. And I think being grounded and doing them in the right environment is super important, in my opinion.
I'd start off low. I wouldn't start straight away. I'd actually start meditating first, because I'm sharing my experience. That's what I did first. And another thing, I personally wouldn't jump into any ayahuasca ceremony. In terms of just, if you've just got old mate down the road who's running ayahuasca circles, I've personally been asked to be on a few of them. I wouldn't do them.
Why?
Unless you've been around a genuine master, it's hard to explain what the feeling's like. But I've got a friend who's done a lot of medicinal ceremonies like ayahuasca and psilocybin and things. And the way he explained to me the difference between someone who can hold a space to a shaman, it's how I would understand the difference between someone who teaches meditation and somebody who's a genuine master. It's night and day. It's a quantum leap. So what is the point of a true shaman or somebody who's been brought up with the elders to hold a space? It's not just to make you feel comfortable and make sure you've got a bucket if you're going to be sick. It's to keep an eye on the field, the spiritual field. It's to have enough of a spiritual standing, enough of a spiritual protection, whether it's through ancestors or different, saints or whatever, to be able to keep meddling souls out. Because if you're going through a psychedelic experience where you might be astral traveling, you might be out of your body, you want your environment safe. And that's the role of a shaman. So unless I found somebody that I felt really confident with, I wouldn't do it. Like when I took mushrooms, I set my own environment based off the teachings I've got from my teachers, the meditation space. I created the Tao Te Ching, which we can talk about another time. So I was happy. I felt safe in that environment. I called on my spiritual fathers and mothers to guide me through that experience, and it was nice.
So that's about being responsible, doing it with someone that knows what they're doing, because I think they can be super profound and they can go either way. And knowing that and being responsible with someone who can see things that you maybe can't see is really important.
And they don't have to be profound in a nice way. I'll be honest with you. I totally believe that your spiritual fathers and mothers who are there to care for you and want you to progress spiritually can give you an ass kicking. You know what I mean? There was a woman, a real spiritual woman, who was a very close connection that I knew with Guan Yin. And she shared a beautiful teaching.
Who's Guan Yin?
Guan Yin is the Bodhisattva of compassion. So in the Buddhist tradition, she said she was meditating once and she had open spiritual channels. And she said she's from the Middle East. And she said she saw randomly an image of incredible violence. And I think someone was about to get shot in the head, right? It was like a video in a meditation. And straight away she went to, I don't want to see this. And she said, Guan Yin held her face to look at it spiritually. And she said, why are you making me see this? And she said, because you need to know what's going on in the world, the suffering. Now, I don't think everybody's ready for that, but obviously I believe she was, because she said it made a deepen a vow. You with me? And it's like I had this conversation. I've learned so much from your Elisa, because she does astrology, gene keys, and things like that.
Human design
stuff.
And if you want a reading, just
if you want to read, let us know, because they've shone a lot of light on myself and how to interact with my family, knowing what their nature is like. But what I find fascinating about it is, and I spoke to Danielle, my wife, about this yesterday. Danielle's nature can't find out about what the dark side do, which is totally fine. It literally is so detrimental that it's damaging to a spiritual journey. Whereas my star signs, I have felt that only by finding the worst practices that go on in the world, I've enriched my practice in a sense that they've made me more compassionate, and again deepen my vow to serve more.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and that's something we've spoken about as well, the light and the dark side, because I've had a yearning to understand more about the dark side, because I want to know how it works, because it's both a manipulation of the truth. And you look at the world, and without going down this rabbit hole today, I feel like the dark side has a deeper practice of what that truth is in aligning themselves and manipulating natural laws and spiritual laws as well. So there's a lot to be learnt. There's a lot to be understood. But
there's a lot to be learned. But I would add that I would definitely first find the positive teachings. So, like, just say you want to find out spiritual truths, whether it's Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, whatever it is. I would definitely, whatever resonates with you the most, or Ayurvedic, Hindu, I would dive into those practices first, so that you have a benevolent understanding on human nature and nature itself and God and the grand intelligence, whatever you want to call it, before you go and have a look at what the dark side do. Because fundamentally the dark side, to my understanding, is just a polar opposite practice to the true spiritual teachings to align with nature, because they want to keep that away from us. You with me? So it's more based on control.
Yeah, absolutely. I think whatever resonates with you in terms of a foundation of spiritual teachings and a foundation of self, you should definitely dive into that first.
My Tao teacher actually said to me years ago, he said, Nick, there's nothing wrong with going and listening to all different spiritual teachings, but learn fully one teacher's teachings. Yep. And it was a great bit of wisdom for me. I really went in and tried to understand as much as I could my spiritual father's teachings, because what happens then is that's your foundation, that's your anchor. And what happens now if I study Zen or anything, these teachings it's just the same. It's all the same teaching. It's just from a different angle, but they connect dots and they give you deeper insights into them. They even connect dots into what the dark side practices are, and how maybe it's fundamental misunderstanding of some teachings. But it's another podcast.
Yeah, well, even on the dark side, like I always think, if I was to harm someone else, fundamentally, it's me expressing my own pain and my own suffering.
It comes back.
And of course, if you start to understand karma and go deeper, it comes back. And by not giving in, but by, say, getting angry at something or someone, that you're ingraining that habit, whether you like it or not. And no one likes to walk around angry the whole time. So again, that Ozal Rinpoche was speaking about, and he said, it's not employing patience, it's actually not giving up your patience. So it's taking responsibility for your virtues and your standards, which is going to align you with truth, which I found really profound for me personally. But yeah, let us know I don't think we talk about the dark side much on here, but we can go into maybe some topics of...
But I'll just add one more thing to what you said. I always think of the analogy, if you have a cell in your leg, you would say it was my cell. You with me? So that cell belongs to the whole. And if you look at the macro, the universe, however you see it, you are a part of that. So whatever you're putting out into the field that connects everything, and you're a part of that connection. So whatever you put out, if it's negativity that you're putting out into the field that affects all life, you're a part of that.
That's one of the biggest insights I got from this story as well, because how can you in tune with someone else's thoughts, for example? And again, it's going deeper into the field and understanding that everything is unified and everything has an effect, cause and effect. So what you're thinking, what you're saying, and your actions are all very important. And I think that if you're meticulous with those and the standards that you set, you'll pull yourself from greater suffering. That's a really good starting point for me in terms of my practice. That's, just daily things I do. I always try and have that sense of presence. Like, I don't speak about people badly, because I know that if I speak about people badly, that's affecting my internal state, and I'm breeding that, I'm manifesting that. And I do my best with thoughts as well. Thoughts is more challenging as well, especially because in this world we're bombarded with so many negative things without even realizing it. Like, it's just our understanding of sex and connection with other human beings is just basically the polar opposite of what they teach on the benevolent side.
When you look at yourself as being an antenna,
yep.
If you start looking at it as an antenna on your roof that's picking up TV signals, every thought we're putting out those thoughts and information into the field, but we're also picking up a lot. See, we both shared that this year we found it at times difficult to even get into a good condition in our meditation, thinking a lot, because 2020 has definitely been, with all of this, that people say 2020 vision. I don't think people can deny that there's been so much uncovered truth, but it's just been so much information, and it's just felt like the whole world is in the head. So there's just so much information going out there that sometimes when you're busy, I'll share a quick story. I had 2 Christmases ago, we came back to Sydney after our trip, and my son Bo was 8 at the time, and we were just before Christmas in Sydney. It was booming. We were in a shopping centre a few days before Christmas. Everyone is just panicking, buying anything they can. And Bo just sort of like tugged on my arm, and he said, "Dad," it was busy, it was noisy. I went down. He said, "Dad, I can't stop thinking." So I said, "Come and sit down." So we went and sat down, and I said, "Just look around." And he was looking around. I said, "Look at everyone's face." I said, "Does everyone look like they're thinking?" And he was like, "Yeah." And I said, "They're putting that many thoughts into the field. I've got to get this. I've got to do that. I've got to blah, blah, blah." I said, "Those thoughts are not yours. You're just in the field picking up everybody's thoughts." And he had an aha moment. He was like, "Oh, Dad, I get it."
When you say that they're putting so many thoughts into the field, I often look at it the other way, where they're receiving so many thoughts because of their vibration or internal state. So it's like, as you said, the antenna is vibrating. You're vibrating in a certain resonance, and that's bringing in that consciousness.
When you think about spiritual practice, what you're actually doing is refining the antenna to pick up more. Mm-hmm. So you're right, they might be on that level, but in that situation before Christmas, you think of how much people are thinking, because they've got so much to do in such little time. So I do think that they're definitely contributing by putting thoughts out there. Yeah,
for sure. But I guess the way I see it is, it's kind of like a feedback loop. So they're drawing those thoughts in, which exist in the consciousness. Like, it's like infinite possibilities that you're drawing in. And again, it's this whole idea of like mastering yourself and mastering your being, so that you can navigate how you want to navigate through this life.
Well, Joe Dispenza says, if you put your arms out like this, which is a beautiful analogy, a beautiful way of seeing it. He said, just above your fingers, just outside of your fingers, around your body, is your field. Now, you might not be able to see that spiritually or with your inner eye, but even if you hold a visualization of that throughout your day, you can be protective of that field. So if I was to think right now that Fletcher's in my field, if I chose to stay in love and ground myself through a practice, I without telling you, can be consciously trying to save you.
Mm-hmm.
Not trying to change Fletcher in any way, but just thinking, while you're in my space, I'm going to love you. The field is loving. And that way we can hold that anywhere we go. We might be in a shopping center and we might be able to find the still point and just say, you know what, in this chaos, I'm going to contribute my field to love and peace and harmony.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a service. I did have a point, but I keep forgetting.
And it's great that you mentioned service.
Yeah,
because,
sure.
You know, one insight I got from my teacher's teacher is the essence of Shulian. Shulian is a term which is you serve selflessly so much that you lose the false self. That dissolves because you're focusing on serving others. And what is left is your true essence. It's the Buddha called it Minshin Genshin. It's enlighten your heart to see your true self. Because when you find the true essence, you see your true role in nature, because we exist here for a reason. And then you can play your part well, your true part.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at what the dark side do, when I found out the true essence of Satanism from Mark Passio, it's the complete opposite. It's to worship the ego. It's the complete opposite, the self.
Destroy God. It's worshipping the separate self, which is what they create.
Yep. Yeah. So it's just polar opposites. That's all.
Truth and lies.
But truth, in my experience, true happiness comes from contribution.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. I think one of the happiest I've ever been and most connected I've ever been was when I was working last year with kids in a boarding house and just building connections with them organically. And that was the most connected I've ever felt in terms of just with everything and everyone. And I remember actually when I returned home from Brisbane to Melbourne and I got off the plane, and it was the biggest shock ever. I mean, I was in Brisbane, so I was in a city, and then I come to Melbourne, which is obviously a significantly bigger city. Just the density walking off the plane, it was literally like I'd stepped into a different world. Like in Brisbane, I felt, like, as I said, connected. I felt more light. And then when I got off the plane, it was literally like my defense systems kicked right up and everything became so much more material, so much more matter, so much more dense.
Well, as you vibrate lower, you become more dense.
And you get caught in that. So, because you're trying to survive. And I think that's when you step out of the city and you go to nature, like, why do you feel so good? It's like...
It's so interesting what you've just said, because you said when you're in that environment, you're trying to survive. See, survival is a lower frequency.
That's right.
And what are you actually trying to save? Yourself. You move into selfishness. This is where doggy dog in the city comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you go to places like New York and you're like, you literally get off the plane running. You're like, why am I running? Like, it's just, that's what it is. That's the environment. So yeah, just on that, I think if people, I know Sean said this last week as well, which I really liked. He recommends for people to at least leave the city once a week and just go out in nature. You don't have to drive a million miles, but I think if you were to do that practice consistently, I honestly think you would get a lot from it. I get a lot from it. That's why we live in nature at the moment. It's far more grounding.
Just go and sit next to a tree, even if it's in the city.
Yeah, if that's all you can do, that's amazing.
Because what's the tree is being still in the chaos. You with me? So if you can actually go and sit next to a tree, just allow yourself to feel the tree.
Well, the tree is just the tree, isn't it? And that's the resonance of truth.
Absolutely. Why do people love kids? Babies, I'm on about. And why do people love dogs? Because a dog doesn't have a separate self-identity. So you look into a dog's eye. Like if I look into your eye now, I might start thinking, oh, Fletch thinks, this, that, and the other. He's judging me. He doesn't like my shirt, or blah, 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 blah. It's this noise. You look at a dog, you don't have to pretend to be someone to your dog, because your dog's just looking at you and loves you no matter what. Dog's naked. Okay, dog doesn't need undies on. And then you look at a brand new baby. There's no self-identity. It's just emptiness in their eyes. They're just life looking back at you. So you don't have to be You don't have to try and be anyone to the baby. And that allows you to feel still.
It's free.
It's freeing. So in a world where you're in the city and it's just non-stop trying to be someone so you're liked and blah, 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 go and sit next to a tree, because the tree doesn't care. It's just a tree. And just allow the tree's presence to ground you.
And if you're not doing that because you live in Tokyo or you live in New York and you can't get to Central Park, serve others. Go and spend time with other people. And serving others doesn't mean you have to go serve bowls at a soup kitchen. Just talk to someone and just listen. Just listen. Your life will change 100%. Should we read a chapter from the Tao Te Ching? So as you can see, Nick and I's conversations, the reasons why we started this podcast is because we'll start off doing something and we'll be on the phone for 7 hours. Do you want to pick a page?
No.
Okay. So how I would normally do this when I was reading the Tao Te Ching is, it's how many chapters? 60?
81.
81. There you go. I'll just flick open a page and I'll read that page, and that'll be the page I read today. So we'll do that. Okay, so we'll go 33.
Read both. We'll read one and read the other because they're obviously both significant.
Yeah, we'll read one, we'll talk about that,
Yep.
and then we'll read the other one. Okay, so this is chapter 33 from the Stephen Mitchell translation. Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. If you realize that you have enough, you are truly rich. If you stay in the center and embrace death with your whole heart, you will endure forever.
So you break down every line of that is very deep.
Yeah, and every line of this, as you read it, is also saying the same thing, isn't it?
It's the essence of the whole book.
Such a profound truth. So knowing others is intelligence, and I think, I'll read the first two. Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Well, I think about, wise people in my life, and they're the people that are calm and peaceful and collected. And those people have this sense of knowing. And what do they know? They know themselves. And if you know yourself, you know others as well. You know the essence of who we are, because the more and more you go into yourself and the deeper you go into your nature, as we said before, that nature is the same nature of all things.
Well, if you look at most masters, they don't say much. So there's so many, you find loads on YouTube of just old masters in the park saying nothing. And over a few years, they've got hundreds of people like doing Tai Chi with them, because people are drawn to their stillness, or there's something about them. They haven't said anything. They haven't tried to advertise what they're doing, but there's something about them without them having to say anything. And that's because they know themselves. They've got the wisdom of knowing themselves. And I think everyone's true essence wants to know that.
And I think about the world as well. And some people would say it's sick, but I think it's just a little bit backwards, because you think about going to school in the West and it's about accumulating intelligence and knowledge so that you can go out into the world and do these things. And there's no practice of knowing the self. So you can see how it would cause suffering. What's the first line? Knowing others is intelligence. So focusing on other people rather than focusing on yourself. Yeah.
And then, because what people do is they have an idea from outside what happiness is. So if, say, you're looking at celebrities and you think they've got the world perfect, you try and mold your life to look like them, and they've got their own challenges. And it's like an analogy of a jigsaw puzzle. If everyone's trying to be the same piece, you'll never complete the puzzle. So you have to find out who you are. So knowing others is intelligence. It's like, it's intellectually thinking that's the way. Mm-hmm. But knowing yourself is true wisdom.
Absolutely. So mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power.
So for me, mastering others is strength, because usually it takes strength. Force.
It takes force, yeah.
Force, yeah.
Mastering yourself is true power. And I think you gave the example before of the teacher, and one is powerful when others believe in them and sit with them, because, you know, one is not that powerful by themselves, but with others, we're very powerful.
It's funny because in that same book, he says, why do all streams flow to the sea? Because the sea is lower than they are. Therefore, humility gives it its power. So when you look at that, it's funny because I think Eckhart Tolle says to exist means to stand out. So everybody's trying to stand out. But what's funny about people like Jesus, Buddha, and these great sages of the past is they stood out by how humble they were, by not trying to stand out.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? Humility gave them their power.
Yeah, for sure. And again, you always think about, well, you can think about external examples. And I think that's something we lack so much today because people are so fearful. I struggle to think about in my life people that I know who are genuinely humble. Genuinely, all their actions are humble. They're not looking for recognition. It's such a powerful thing meeting someone who is truly humble, and there's such a deep wisdom there. There's such a deep knowing there.
And that's because nature's humble. So they're closer to nature.
Exactly right. Closer to truth.
When you look at the Taoist teachings, the Tao can't be understood. The first line in that book is Tao Ke Tao Fei Chong Tao. It means a Tao that can be explained by words or comprehended by thoughts is not the true Tao. Therefore, if we don't know what it is and we can't find it, but it gives life to everything, and we only exist because of it, then its nature is humble. So the more humble we are, the closer we are to it.
Yep. If you realize that you have enough, you are truly rich.
It speaks for itself.
Yeah, I love that. You shared a story where you met a guy in Sydney and he was just slowly giving away all his possessions. And then he said by the end of it, where he was homeless, he basically had nothing. It was the happiest he'd ever been.
Yep. It was in Nelson Bay, actually. It's just some guy who's living on a boat, and he had more money than he needed. He was getting more money off his pension than he needed. His wife had died, and he slowly giving away things. But then he actually said he wanted to see how simple he could live and how little he could live off. So he just went about his day, and he would just speak to people, go to the market, and he would just buy like a cucumber or something like that. He just eat a cucumber one day. That might be all he ate all day. And he was just trying to simplify. When it came into a habit, he said what he found was every time his life got more and more simple, he's spending less and less money. He was eating, everything he was doing was less. He said his contentment and his happiness was just going up and up and up.
Yeah, for sure. Like I think about times when one of the practices I've tried to employ is if someone asks me for something, no matter how much I value it, I'll give it. So I haven't been asked anything that I'm too attached to so far, but I think money is a really good example. Like recently I've given more money than I've ever given in my life to people that I don't even really know that well. And, you know, the intellectual mind will say that's crazy, but for me, it's a practice and I don't regret it at all. So yeah, I find the less...
How does it feel though?
Yeah, it feels great. It feels great for sure. And I think those acts, when you're being genuine, those acts light up other people as well. Like I think you gave the example that Osho actually gave, where the man was going to steal that woman's purse in the train station.
Yeah, he said putting trust on someone.
Yeah, if you put trust on someone else. So I think people are quite rocked when they may ask for something big, which I think a lot of people in this time need help, and a lot of people are afraid to ask. But I was able to give help, and it was a big ask for them on their behalf, and it was big for me to give as well, but I still gave, and I don't regret it at all. I don't think I ever will regret it.
Again, it's unconditional versus conditional for me, because I just finished that story with Osho. Osho said someone was going to steal a bag, and the person said to the person that was going to steal the bag, I'm just going to go to the bathroom. I'm going to trust you to look after my bag. She put trust on the person. So he sat there and looked after the bag. But
Trust, yeah.
but going back to when before I found any spirituality, I got onto like motivational teachings and like Tony Robbins and the essence of tithing 10% of your money to a good cause will bring more money back. And I started tithing then, and it felt good to give, but there was still a condition on it, because back then it was like, I'm doing this because money's going to come back. And that's not how the Tao Te Ching basically says a virtue is, if you're doing something to be virtuous, you've lost the virtue because it's conditional. There's conditions on it. It's like he uses analogy, Lao Tzu, of a flower. If you're depressed and a flower lightens up your day, the flower's may have saved your life, but it doesn't know it has. It's just being its true nature. And that's where we need to be. So that's why I asked you how it felt, is because if you're genuinely given because you feel you've already got enough, like you look at the suffering that's going on in the world, I like to give, even if it's not with money, even if it's through my meditation. If I do an hour's meditation of chanting I love you to all beings, that's a service. But my life has just been so blessed. You know what I mean? Even if I was in this situation, I never had any money and not much food, I'm still blessed. You know, the people that are in my life, I'm just so blessed. So you don't give to get back. You give because you're grateful that you've already got a great life.
Absolutely. But because I know when I did give that, I noticed that for me, there are actually conditions on it as well. So initially, but that's an old habit. So I still gave, but I was aware of those patterns. But what I realized is it allowed me to get to a deeper wisdom where, again, we reference that Osho story where you're placing trust on someone. The conflict with me was that I didn't know these people very well. I spent a little bit of time with them, and your mind kicks in and goes, oh, this is a scam. Are you wasting money? Like, blah, blah, blah. But I believed that they were telling the truth, and I was happy to help because it was for a really good cause. So I gave.
Plus, you've done your part. You see.
That's exactly right. And that's how I want to be as an individual. Mm-hmm. So as you said, you put trust in them, you wish them all the best, and then whatever they decide to do with that money, whether it's what they said or not, is entirely up to them.
Again, this book, we're only on one or two chapters, but in that book, he says, the sage trusts those that are trustworthy and those that are not trustworthy. That is true trust.
Yeah.
Awesome.
For sure. And it's different to being naive. It's very different to being naive.
Absolutely. Because let's not go down the political conversation, but somebody said I've had conversations with people who have said about Trump, right? And they've said, what happens if Trump is, a bad guy and what he's saying he's going to do is not the right thing and blah, 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 blah. I said, as far as I'm aware, I believe that what he's saying he's doing the right thing. Therefore, I'll support him, give him the benefits of the doubt. If he ends up turning on the people and it's one of the cruelest things that's ever been done on humanity, that I still did my part. That's his journey and that will be his karma. And I wish him all the best. But it's not being naive. It's just I'm doing my part.
You do what you can do.
Do what you can do.
If you stay in the center and embrace death with your whole heart, you will endure forever.
What do you get from that?
That's a difficult one for me to explain intellectually. I think if you stay in the center, and again, that comes back to the middle way. So it's the center of you. It's a groundedness is also how I would explain it as well. And then it goes on to say, and embrace death with your whole heart, you will endure forever. I suppose is that, so in some sense, confronting your ultimate fear?
Yeah, but
wholeheartedness, living fearlessly.
Yeah, because what do we fear? Death. And it's not necessarily the death of life. It's the death of the ego. Mm-hmm. This is why in many spiritual traditions, they say the step to enlightenment is to die before you die. You're not dying. The persona's dying. And when that dies, you see the world a completely different way. You see it like a newborn does before a newborn knows what a flower is. It's just smelling, tasting. It just, wow, there's no internal dialogue. It's just having the experience. To die before you die is to let go. It's to die to every moment. It's to be so detached that every moment you die. And when you're comfortable with death, you realize that there's no such thing as death. And that is, in my understanding of that, which is a limited understanding, is to stay wholeheartedly in the center and embrace death. You know, there's no such thing as death. You go deep in the heart.
All right. So chapter 34. Okay. The great Tao flows everywhere. All things are born from it, yet it doesn't create them. It pours itself into its work, yet it makes no claim. It nourishes infinite worlds, yet it doesn't hold on to them. Since it is merged with all things and hidden in their hearts, it can be called humble. Since all things vanish into it and it alone endures, it can be called great. It isn't aware of its greatness, thus it is truly great.
That's funny because we've basically gone over that already.
Yeah, and that's a testament to the book as well, because each paragraph is saying the same thing, just in different words.
And that's what's beautiful about the book, is you don't have to read it from front to back.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe, you know, I heard David Icke, which was a bit of an interesting one. I remember David Icke talking once about how like oracle cards work. And he said, because they work, because in the book, there might be, you know, I don't know how many is in it. Let's say there's 50 cards in the deck, all with different aspects of teachings. If you ask a question to the cards, the question has a vibration. Therefore, the chances of you pulling a card out that match with that vibration are strong. That's why you always get cards that will help you answer the question, or most of the time. As long as the question comes from a strong heart-based emotion. So that's why the book, I think, is so important, because if you just open it at where you need, you don't even have to ask it a question. I think if you just, whatever you're feeling, it always answers. It always works for me.
Yeah, I've had some cool experiences with the book as well. In terms of like, I'll be thinking of a chapter and I'll open straight up to it. I know Danielle was saying, she's like, oh, I always get, maybe it was 34. Or,
she gets the same one all the time.
And she's like, I always get that. And as she was saying that, I flicked open, and of course that opens. So there's a couple of cool things that happen.
But that's basically going on about the nature of Tao.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We might not go through the whole thing, but I really love the last line, because I think this is the essence of humility. It isn't aware of its greatness, thus it is truly great.
It's true.
It's like when I don't know if you've ever witnessed someone who's so good at what they do and they're just in this flow state, and there's no sense of arrogance there. There's no sense of I'm better than you. It's just they're in their nature totally.
And it's beautiful to watch.
It's the most mesmerizing thing you'll ever see. And I think that's coming back to the individual being's nature as well. Like I use this example when I speak with people sometimes, like your dharma or your purpose here may be to pick bananas off a tree. But if you watch someone's who's actually meant to here to pick bananas off a tree, there'll be a magic to it. There'll be an art to it. That's just one example of many.
In Buddhism, they say you should be able, if you're enlightened, you can enlighten someone giving them a parking ticket.
Mm.
And that's just being. Now, I shared a story about my dad, which I think is just a cool story with the Dalai Lama.
It is a cool story,
yeah. My dad came over once and was just talking to my dad, and he said, hey, Nick, he said, he was a taxi driver, and he said, 11 o'clock at night, he says he pulls up with the traffic lights. He said he looks left to his right, cars pulled next to him. He said, in the back of the car, the Dalai Lama was there. And he said he's looked at the Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama's just smiled and waved at him. And he said, Nick, I got this wave of like peace come over him. And he said he nearly started crying. And he said to me, what is that? And I said, that's the presence of somebody who is, as I said, created a field, a peaceful field, who's mastered their environment, mastered their inner state. Yeah.
Yeah, I think mastering the self is all one needs to do and endeavor on that journey.
It's the only thing you can do.
Yeah, that's correct.
I can't make anybody, and I shouldn't want to make anybody do anything.
It's the only thing you can truly do.
The only thing you can truly do, only thing I've got control over fully is where I put my attention.
And that's why I really, really resonate with Buddhist teachings, because essentially for me, it's mastering the self. But I think that's why it's becoming more and more popular in the West. This is just my opinion, is because it's kind of starting with this mind and this intellect perspective on
What's
how
science, you say?
That's it. It's a science.
If you do this, you'll gain that. You know what I mean? And that is, I'm not saying there's no, because I do both, by the way. I do both the Buddhist and also praying to benevolent beings outside of me. Okay. But if you look at faiths that purely put everything on God alone, there's no responsibility. It's they're putting God will look after everything, or Jesus will look after everything. It's all good. And I think that's got no solid foundation if that's all you're doing.
It's spiritual bypassing, and it comes from my understanding from a place of fear generally. So
I agree.
It can be extremely daunting looking within, but often when you see that big beast within, it's not as scary as you think, and it disappears.
But it's still hard. And this is one thing I often say to people. There is a huge difference between focusing on your breathing a few times a day or meditating and taking the Bodhisattva vow. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Actually making a vow to relieve the suffering of all sentient beings. That's a completely different ball game, because it is hard to forgive yourself if you've made a lot of mistakes. I've made a lot of mistakes, so it hasn't been easy. But
why do you forgive yourself, and how do you forgive yourself?
If I was to be honest with you, I can understand why it's hard for other people, but I'm pretty kind to myself. Probably too much. I try and detach, and I tell you why. It's because of a fundamental understanding that if I hold on to something and I don't forgive myself, I'm just not helping myself or anybody else. And I've known people who've looked at some of the mistakes they've made. And look, I'm telling you, I've done mistakes that I've been totally unconscious of, that I've found out years later in meditation. I remember meditating just a few years ago. And I remember I just got shown something that happened. And I'll tell you what happened. About a year before, all the boys are outside the job we were doing, all the abseilers. And I'm talking to someone like you now, and there's a group of lads there, and they'd been partying in Thailand, and there was a picture of one of them rough the next day, and he looked rough, you know what I mean? And someone's showed me the picture, and like I'm in the middle of a conversation, and I'm like laughing. I've gone, oh, look at the head on him, you know what I mean? And put the phone back. And my other mate has nudged me and said, look. And there was a guy next to me, he crossing the road, who had a real deformed head.
Yeah.
And I just went, oh my gosh. But where my ego, if you like, went was, well, at the time, I thought, well, I never meant it for him. So I don't know there's nothing else I can do. And I sort of dropped it there. But in meditation, a year later, in the middle of nowhere, that whole situation replayed in my mind. And I was shown how, I don't know if for definite, I mean, this guy might not have even heard me, but I was shown that what that could have done, that poor guy, that may have been the straw that broke the camel's back. He may have gone home and committed suicide. You know what I mean? So I had to go deep into forgiveness there, and also be more mindful of what you say, when you say it, and how you say it. And don't get me wrong, I don't do that now. I still fall off every single day, as you know, living with me, but but it's an ongoing practice.
For sure. Being impeccable with your word is so so powerful. Because things like that happen and they hold you accountable for that as well. It's terrible feeling when you put someone down like that, and whether you mean it or not. Forgiveness is a massive one as well, but forgiveness is so powerful and beautiful at the same time, because it really allows you to truly go into empathy and understand how someone else may be feeling, and it's a very connective experience as well. I think about all the mistakes, so many of the mistakes I've made, which are not easy to go back and look at. Like, I was actually thinking of one today, which I know it's the truth in this podcast, but it's not fair to share because it's not just about me. But that was pretty tough.
But one thing as well, what I've realized is all you can do is say sorry and mean it.
That's correct.
If I was to do a mistake to Fletcher and he couldn't forgive me, I can't control that, but I can be sincere and say, I'm sorry.
And that's understanding the evolution as well, because I could only ever make a decision like you at that point in time to the level of your consciousness, the level of your understanding and perspective of life then. So when I look back at that particular mistake, that's how I see it, because I made the best call that I could have then and there, and that was therefore the right decision. But it becomes more difficult, I think, the more you know and the more you're aware, and then
more responsibility,
and then you do slip up, and then you can.
Well, I'd share one insight that I got from my Tao teacher, my spiritual teacher. He said I seen him live once, and he was talking about his new book, which was Greatest Forgiveness, and the song that he released. He said to everybody, he said, "Listen to the joy in my voice in this song." And it's a funny mantra. It's like, "I forgive you, please." It's like it's got a joyful essence to it. And he said, you can be too serious asking for forgiveness. He said, it should be a joyful thing, because you're fundamentally experiencing forgiving someone and being forgiven. Karmically, you're cutting the chains, you're detaching, you're allowing. Imagine a soul's died that has hurt you. If you can't forgive them, spiritually speaking, you've got a chain, you're holding them onto you. They can't progress and you can't progress. So what I got from that was, and I'm going to share one more story, which really moved me. My wife always said, I wish that I had never made the mistakes I'd made. And I lived in a monastery when I got into a monastery when I was younger, this, that, and the other. When we were traveling, we did a meditation together, a Buddhist meditation. And when I finished the practice, we were chanting together. And when we finished, I turned around, she was crying. I said, "What are you crying for?" She said, "I have just seen and experienced herself in a past life being a Buddhist nun, crying because she never chose to live in the world. She wanted to make mistakes so she could go deeper into her forgiveness. She wanted to feel the love of a husband and the love of a child." And that what the insight I got from that is what we want. We are exactly where we are. We should embody it and not wish to be somewhere else. Yeah. Not wish that, because if you say I want to be a millionaire, you're just going to take your karmic lessons to be a millionaire. It's the same thing. I've met so many people. You can always find something to complain about, can't you? Mm-hmm. But you are where you're meant to be, and it's not always brighter on the other side. And with the forgiveness, where I was going with it was, I realized the joy, the blessing in making mistakes. Because you make a mistake, you're allowed to, it's the only way you're going to experience asking for forgiveness and experiencing what it's like to be forgiven. And vice versa, someone hates you, experience offering forgiveness and giving them the opportunity to.
100%, no doubt about it. I remember having a meditation when I was in America, and it was a big group meditation, and I saw all these events from my childhood to my young adult life, my teenage life as well, all these significant events that I created a story around. And without me even trying to digest them, I was just filled with gratitude. And I just understood. I already knew that they were great teachers because I had grown a bit by that stage, but understanding it from that perspective, I was so deeply grateful that I was able to experience all those things and then be where I was, and I still am today. And I found
you wouldn't change it, would you?
I wouldn't change anything at all. And I've actually found myself, this might sound so mad, but I've actually found myself in situations after where I've almost longed to suffer or longed to make a mistake so that I could
Common,
learn.
that though. It's actually common, and it's where people on a spiritual path. Because I said that to my Buddhist teacher. I said, she gave a presentation once, and after it, I couldn't help but feel that I couldn't put my finger on my suffering. And I said to her, is my suffering the fact that I feel I've lived such a blessed life and I can't put my finger on suffering? And she said, yeah. She said, you don't, to not know, we don't know what, you know, that can be a state of limbo and numbness, if you like, you know what I mean? You don't know.
Suffering is fundamentally a choice though, isn't it?
It is if you drag it out, if you identify with it. You know what I mean? Like you can, you know, if your wife leaves you, there's obviously going to be pain there if you still love her. But if you tell that story over and over and over again, you're choosing to suffer.
Yeah, absolutely. And you spoke about before the conditions of things that may make you happy, but you're still carrying the same karma. So you're still going to experience the same karma as a millionaire, but you may just have $1 million. And it reminded me of what you shared with me, where the Buddha said, you know, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. So it's not the conditions that enlighten you. It's the self, and it's understanding the self.
Well, that to me, that teaching means before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. There's a resistance to it. I don't want to chop wood and carry water. And you're carrying, I'm in pain and this, that, and the other. After enlightenment, there's no resistance. You're just fully chopping wood and carrying water.
So what's changed? Like the perception has changed. The understanding of things.
The resistance has gone.
The resistance is gone.
The mind
it's gone through understanding though, isn't it?
Yep. Because, and I'll just finish on this because we've covered a lot. I think we should wrap it up soon. But just to finish on it, this is why in Buddhism they suggest meditating on the teaching of dependent arising and emptiness every day.
This is finishing on that.
I'll finish on it because we can go into it next time. We can
talk about it. Do you want to keep going for
another 2 hours? But just the reason I shared it is because dependent arising is anything that arises, that exists, depends on everything else. So my watch exists, and it's dependent on the person that made it, the factory it came from, the minerals that are in it, the sun, the water, the ancestors of everyone that was involved in it, the software, blah, blah, blah. We can trace any one of them back to the source. You take one person out. If you could take one person out before this watch got here, one guy was off sick, it wouldn't be here. Okay? That's dependence arising. So emptiness is, the only thing it's empty of is a separate self-identity of being a watch, the label we put on it. So once it's separate of a separate self, it's empty of a separate self, it's full of everything else. Now, when you understand that, you observe a different world. My Buddhist teacher said to me years ago, when you get to a certain point, Nick, the world won't look like blue, won't be blue anymore. I didn't know what she meant until I went deeper into this teaching, because chop wood, carry water, resistance, you're chopping wood and carrying water, and you don't want to be there. When you see the world through the eyes of interdependence and emptiness, you see the whole cosmos in the axe, in the water, in the wood, in what chopping wood and carrying water is gonna provide for your family and blah, blah, blah. It's a completely different world. It's a different experience.
Yep, absolutely. That teaching changed my life as well.
Absolutely. And and I don't do it enough. I should reflect on it more.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you that as well, because I know we've spoken about this and we've both had profound experiences and we've met people that have had profound experiences, but we're still living a seemingly pretty normal life. We both still suffer. And we both still get, caught lost in ignorance and illusion all the time. So what draws you out of having these satori's and out of having these profound, deep insights and understanding these teachings, like you've been taught them 1,000 times and you practice them 1,000 times, but yet you're still, I think I know the answer, but I would like you to explain it, but yet you're still living this life. You're still getting drawn back into these old habit patterns?
I think it's two things. On an external, without pointing fingers, I think our society in reality is set up to keep us out of that condition. You want to be, I'm not saying you can't do it, be fully present in everything you do, but I've said to you before, once you start work and you do have a diary and you do have work that you've got to send invoices and you've got to be at a certain job at a certain time, you're in time, you're focusing in the future. That pulls you out of the condition, pulls me out anyway. I'm not at a point where I can be fully present in that. Another part of it is karma. You know, my teacher says, why can't you chant all day? It's your karma stops you.
So what is karma?
So from that angle, right, from where my teacher's coming from there, and this is like, just say in the past, I have been a spiritual teacher, for example. And while I was a spiritual teacher, I may have led my students down the wrong path, okay, or took advantage of them. If we look at this body, okay, physical body, and there's energy that moves it, there's an intelligence that's talking now that directs the energy that moves the matter. If I was to die now, that intelligence has left the body. So we can say, we call it the soul, or spirit. We all have that. Everything has that. You cut a flower, starts to die. There's the life essence that makes it grow towards the sun and drink the water is gone, okay? So once I've led these students down the wrong path, and when they leave the body, they don't forgive me, okay? They can influence this life. They can say, you know what? I don't forgive you yet. I'm suffering because of what you did to me. You haven't been deep enough in your forgiveness. Therefore, every time you're chanting, I'm going to put an idea in your head. So that's one. But there's another way of looking at that, because there's a universal aspect of, you know, what you're putting out is just coming back and blah, blah, blah. But that's an angle that my teacher comes from, which is very interesting.
That's really interesting. I think you do a really good job of explaining that. I also think of karma, again, from my internal experiences, and I think about it from living consciously and unconsciously. So
conditioned.
Yeah, these habits that you're making, for example. So if you get angry at someone and then you continue to get angry at someone, then you're going to continue to lash out and not see things as they are. And that's the habit that you're building. Yeah. That's the unconscious patterns coming out. So if you want to rewrite karma and understand your karma from that level, an intellectual level, it's about understanding the seeds that you're planting, and whether you allow them to germinate or not is the most important thing. So again, that's meditation, that's that practice. But
it's a great point, but and I love that. And I think take both on board. When I'm looking at, I'll tell you a little practice I do. If you watch a movie, right, or you watch a documentary, or you find out what suffering's going on in the world. For example, I watched Braveheart a few weeks ago, and when I saw how ruthless, even though it's a fictional movie, when I saw how ruthless they were back then, I believe anything that I experience or comes into my awareness in this life, whether I'm looking for it or it comes to me, there's a spiritual reason for that. I ask for forgiveness. If I know the dark things that are going on in the world, I ask for forgiveness. Please forgive me if I have contributed in any way to that suffering, or I've done that in a past life.
Just to stop you there, is when you talk about interdependent arising,
yep,
you have contributed to it.
Correct.
We have all contributed to it. And that's what we said in the first podcast as well. We're all in this situation collectively. We are all responsible. Now, we all do have different roles to play in how we perceive the situation. But understanding that there is suffering in this world that we've played a role in and that we continue to play a role in, but also understanding that that's happening because of us, we can therefore change that and redirect that. So yeah, sorry to cut you off.
No, that's good. That's good. So yeah. That's just a technique I do, because I thought to myself, imagine everybody in the world, when they saw a bad news report, or they something went on in the world, or they saw any suffering, they say a video of a dog getting abused, and or a dog fighting, or something that's going on in the world. If everyone that saw that straight away in the heart said, please forgive me, humbly and sincerely from their heart, for if I've contributed to that. Everything that happens in the physical world is a reflection of what's going on spiritually in the field. So we can go through this transitional period two ways. We can exhaust our karma through suffering, which is always dangerous, because in suffering, if you're unconscious, you create more suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Or we can collectively come together and forgive. You know, there's a mantra my teacher shares, and it's such a powerful mantra. I get insights on it on a daily basis. I forgive you. I forgive you. Please forgive me. All souls forgive each other. Bring love, peace, harmony. Now, what's that saying? I forgive you is I forgive anybody for anything. No matter what suffering is going on in the world, in my heart, I forgive you. The first stage is you lead by example. I forgive you. Please forgive me is all souls, please forgive me for any mistakes I've ever done in any lifetime. All souls forgive each other is, you know, through our feeling, intention, and even through chanting the mantra, we push a message out into the field. That is a calling for all beings to forgive each other and bring love, peace, harmony. Is bring universal love, peace, harmony. It's a powerful mantra.
And again, what's it doing? It's unifying us.
Unifying, serving.
It's understanding what we really are, which is one. So we've covered a lot. I think forgiveness is something we could probably talk about a little bit more, because I can feel the questions people are going to have, and questions I've had myself is, yeah, but I can't forgive what they did because of X, Y, and Z.
Well, why don't we ask the viewers to send us questions?
Yeah.
And then we can answer questions.
There'll be heaps of questions.
Good. Questions are good. Questions are good.
I don't know if there'll be many questions, but if we get one, we'll answer it. Yeah, look, let's leave it there for now, because I'm hungry, and I think that was a good chat, and we spoke about a lot. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Fletcher.
I think we'll bring the Tao Te Ching back, and we'll read it, maybe a couple of other chapters. We'll probably do this each week if we don't have a guest.
Yep.
Just keep talking, because we're good at that. But yeah, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Much love. Take care.